Hi, I'm Mary, a librarian and book reviewer with a focus on stories written for kids, tweens, and teens. Today, I am joined by author Frank W. Baker, who's the lead writer on the acclaimed graphic novel We Survived the Holocaust, the Bluma and Felix Goldberg story. Frank has worked in television news, public education, and public television. In 1998, he founded the Media Literacy Clearinghouse website and began work helping teachers and students better understand how to think critically about the media. Welcome, Frank. It's so lovely to have you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, really. Thanks for having me.
Could you please tell us a little bit about this book that you've been working on, both the narrative and the graphic novel version?
Thank you so much. This has been a labor of love for me. It started in primarily in the year 2000 when the late Felix Goldberg of Columbia, South Carolina, spoke at our synagogue. The occasion was Yom HaShoah, which is the annual Day of Remembrance. And the Day of Remembrance is held every year around the world as a way to remember the Holocaust, those who died, those who survived, and those who saved the lives of others. And it's traditionally a long ceremony. I'm sitting in my synagogue with 200 or 300 people, and Mr. Goldberg, of blessed memory, is the primary speaker. And I'm shaken to my core by his testimony of what happened to him, how he was captured by the Nazis, how he became a slave laborer, and so forth. And the ceremony ended, and as it usually does, people walk up to him and shake his hand, and but he walked up to me, and he knew I was an educator. And with the speech in his hand, he handed it to me, and I'll never forget this. In the Polish accent, he said, Frankie, Frankie, do something with this. Do something with this. I took that speech home, and I don't know if your audience can relate. It went to the top of the pile of my desk, and then it went to the middle of the pile, and then it went to the bottom of the pile. And honestly, years passed, but I would hear his voice over the years, Frank, do something with this. And I finally approached uh, his children and said, I'd like to create a website for educators that would tell your father's story and your mother's. Both of them were miraculous survivors of the Holocaust. And they gave it their blessing. And so I put every one of my skills to work to create a website called storiesofsurvival.org, which basically is divided into three parts: before the war, during the war, and after the war. And I looked for all the assets that I could and put them on that website. And then I began sharing it uh, at the South Carolina Social Studies Conference, at meetings of Holocaust teachers, and I got very positive response. Well, sometime later, short time later, I said, all right, I've done something for educators. What have I done for students? Uh, and what motivated me at the time was I had seen these surveys indicating that many young people are apparently ignorant, lacking essential knowledge about the Holocaust. I knew the graphic novel format appealed to this young adult age group. And a colleague of mine at the University of South Carolina here in Columbia, who had written her own graphic novel, saw the website and said, I'm putting you in touch with an editor at a publisher who offered me a contract on the phone on our first conversation. And uh, it's and partnered me with an award-winning illustrator, and We Survived the Holocaust was published in September of 2022. So uh, we just passed our 3-year anniversary.
That's wonderful. And how inspiring that you've had so many positive connections leading you to this story, that it was one you didn't know of initially, that it came to you, and that you had such a positive reception from publishers. Also, that's a journey that tends to take a bit longer than just a phone call.
I was real fortunate. Um, my parents and the subjects of my books were contemporaries. I knew the Goldbergs growing up. I knew a little bit about their past, but not the entire story. So putting together this website and writing these now two books uh, required a great deal of research. And as I speak to students, I really emphasize the fact that if you're going to write a book about the Holocaust, you've got to get your facts straight. And I'll put in a plug here for Tim Ogline, my illustrator, who served as a fact checker. We would come upon events or facts that we better fact check this, and that required some time. But again, if you're going to write a book about the Holocaust, you want to make sure to get it right. And I'm pleased that we have gotten some very positive feedback from teachers and from students.
And as you say, you started telling the story to educators, so adults, and then transferred the information into a graphic novel format to reach younger readers. Who do you think is the best audience for this book, if there is one?
Well, I know, having studied uh, state and national teaching standards, that the Holocaust falls in grades 5 through 12. And so the primary audience, I think, is middle school, and but it is used in high schools as well. And here in South Carolina, I've been hearing from teachers who said, Frank, we've had the Diary of Anne Frank, we've had Elie Wiesel's Night. We needed something else. And your book is really helping fill the gap. I mean, this is a South Carolina story, but it's a story that resonates because the Holocaust may have been, you know, uh, 50, 60 years ago, but it still resonates. In fact, when I speak to young people, I have to remind them that are there's rhetoric and actions today in our world that resemble 1940s Nazi Germany. And we need to recognize that. And I think educators and parents need to help students make those connections because it's right there on the news every night if you're paying attention.
How do you think literature, especially literature like this, helps to connect readers to the world as it is and the world as it was? What do you think is the benefit of looking at literature using that lens?
You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the subject of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism caused the Holocaust, and anti-Semitism continues to this day. In fact, it's increased substantially in the last year or more in the United States and worldwide. And when I speak to students, I ask them if they know what anti-Semitism means, and they don't. And so we have to help them understand what it is. And asking that question to me is important. In fact, when I do speak to students, it starts with a series of questions. How many of you all know what the Holocaust is? How many of you all know who Adolf Hitler was? How many of you all know how many Jews were killed during the Holocaust? How many of you all know who collaborated with the Nazis to kill Jews? How many of you all know what propaganda means? How many of you all know what anti-Semitism means? And when most hands don't come up, I hold up my book and I say, the answers are right here. The answers are right here. And I'm really pleased when I meet teachers who go beyond one class period to engage students uh, in the Holocaust by having them do research. That the book is a jumping off point to do some more digging. And I have found that students are uh, incredibly curious about the Holocaust now. And I'm going to speculate. I think one of the reasons is because there have been so many television movies and theatrical movies and other productions about the Holocaust, and they've gotten lots of publicity. So again, if teachers and parents are paying attention, they know that the Holocaust is not going away. And every year we have remembrances, and we have opportunities to learn from survivors if we take the time to do that. I also ask students, where did you first learn about the Holocaust? Was it at school? Was it from a television show, a movie? Did you hear a survivor speak? Because where they learned is extremely important, which then leads me to media literacy, because we know that many young people who get their news and information from TikTok and beyond may not consider the source, and they may be exposed to Holocaust distortion and denialism, which again is rampant on many of the social media platforms. So when I do speak to students, it is about the Goldberg story, powerful as it is. It's about anti-Semitism, and it's also about media literacy.
Those are all really important things that kids can learn from and then utilize as they move forward into adulthood as well. So you've mentioned a couple of times that you did research yourself for this book, and then also that it's a conversation that's not very easy to have. It's a part of history that is complicated and painful in a lot of ways, and that there's a difference between the research side of things and the human side of things. So, as you were writing this book, what was the importance to you to blend those two things in its delivery?
I think you have to. Well, I'll go back to creating the website. The website is a chronology, so it follows the Goldbergs from the moment they were born until the moment they were captured, and where they were moved, and what they did as slave laborers, how how they were liberated, how they met at a displaced persons camp, got married, and immigrated to South Carolina. So it's 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 a historical story. Uh, you know, on the website, we have a historical kind of map, what was happening in the news while these things were happening over in Europe. And I think that's really important. How did the news at the time report the Holocaust? What did people know? What did they not know? What did the Roosevelt administration do to hamper uh, immigrants, because there was a lot of prejudice against allowing large numbers of Jews into the country at the time. And that's a whole nother aspect of the entire story. Um, but when you do research, uh, you want to humanize it. Uh, Mr. Goldberg, before he passed away, asked his oldest son to come into the room, and he confessed something that he had held for a long time. He said to his son, I need to tell you something. I need to get this off my chest, that I helped build the gallows that hung Jews. And that guilt stayed with him until his dying days. Uh, I read somewhere that the best way to teach the Holocaust is through the survivor story, for students to hear directly from survivors. So we have videotape interviews of both Felix and Bluma, which were done by public television here in South Carolina and by the Shoah Foundation later. So it's well documented. And so you get to hear them tell their story. And when I do speak to students or to other groups, I invite members of the Goldberg family to join me, because really this is their parents' story, and they tell it much better than I could. I'm just an educator who was passionate about helping elevate the Holocaust in the eyes of our young people. And I think we've tried to do that. I will add, if you don't mind, Mary, that I've taken the royalties from the sales of this book, and we've put them into purchasing a copy of the book for every middle school and high school in the state of South Carolina. And we've taken it one step further with additional speaking fees. We have purchased classroom sets of the book, and we're giving those to teachers who are agreeing to utilize those with students. And then we come back into the classroom as they're reading the book and to answer their questions. And I can tell you they have a lot of questions.
Oh, that's wonderful. What has the impact been like for you as an author and then for these students in the classroom to have both of those things come together so nicely?
I think more than anything, when I look at how public education superficially covers the Holocaust, I feel like we're filling a gap. We're filling a gap. I will relate one story to you, if you don't mind. A small school district north of Columbia, South Carolina, a year ago, the social studies coordinator contacted me and said, Frank, some of our teachers are requesting a copy of your book. We'd like to see it before we allow you to give it. And I said, you need to know that we've already distributed copies to many of your middle schools. And so later that day, I got an email from this social studies coordinator. We would prefer that you not distribute any more copies because we object to the violence in the book. And they cited an image of the Nazi holding a gun to the back of a Jew's head. I was appalled that they now wanted to restrict the book from going out to other schools. And I contacted a journalist at the newspaper here locally. A reporter called me. It was on the front page of the newspaper that the school district is now restricting this book about Columbia survivors. That story was picked up by the Jerusalem Post and the Broward News. And a week later, our book went to number 5 on Amazon. So, unintended consequences, right? But why wouldn't you want students to know about the violence? And I think it's appropriate. My illustrator and I, we thought long and hard about how far do you go in a book about the Holocaust, because it could have been a lot worse. But we're very sensitive to the age of the young people that are reading it. And I've got to tell you, I've heard from grandparents and I've heard from parents and I've heard from educators about how much they appreciate this book and this story and its themes.
Yeah, well, that's a good point about the graphic novel element of it, because as a graphic story, it is, for lack of a better word, graphic. I mean, the Holocaust is not something that was sunshine and roses, and it's important to be able to capture the truth of the situation in a way that is, as you say, age appropriate. What were those conversations like between you and your illustrator, and how did you determine how far you could go?
Well, I'll give you one example. Um, there was a scene in which the Nazi is holding a gun to the back of a Jew's head, but you don't see the gun. You just see the Nazi. And my editor said to Tim, we need to make it more obvious. Let's pull the gun a little bit to the right for that image. Now, we could have shown a body in the next frame on the ground. We didn't. It's implied what happens next. Those are the kinds of conversations that you have. And again, I have to brag about Tim Oakline, this award-winning illustrator who my editor, John Shableski, partnered me with. When I got this contract, I said, okay, I have to start writing a graphic novel. And I began writing scenes and dialogue and delivering all of that to Tim, who is calculating how many images it will take and how long it will take to create those images. Uh, it was really a rewarding experience for me to do that. At the same time as he's delivering images to me, I'm sharing them with the family, and they're going, "Oh wow!" So this is what happened to our parents. One other story, if you don't mind. When the Goldberg family said, "Yeah, we'll help you any way you can," they brought me a box of documents, Most of them were in Polish, and I knew which ones were important and which ones were not. But I came upon a document that was the manifest of the ship that brought the Goldbergs from Germany to the United States. So I had on that document the name of the ship, and I Googled the name of the ship, and I stumbled upon a black and white silent film of the maiden voyage of the ship. And it is so powerful. The Goldberg family said, wow, this is the ship that brought our parents to America. And you see uh, Jews getting off a train and they're carrying luggage and they walk up the gangplank to this big ship. And there's a big banner that says, welcome displaced persons. And there's a military band performing at the bottom of the gangplank. Can you imagine what, and as I play it for students, can you imagine what it must have felt like for these people to get on the ship, to board this ship and know that they're going to America, to freedom, away from the nightmare that they've lived 5, 6 years? It's just incredible. And so I think there's emotion there. There's empathy there. There are stories there. And there are so many stories still yet to be told.
Absolutely. And being able to share them in a way that kids will understand and connect with is also really powerful and important. Is there a scene or a moment in Felix and Bluma's story that resonates particularly strongly with you, or do you think that resonates particularly strongly with readers?
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can find it while we're here live. There was a scene that Tim drew that he sent me, and I'm going to see if you can see this. It is the the Bluma's family being chased by the Nazis who had just burned their home, and they're running away in fear. And when Tim first sent me that image, I said, "Oh my God, this is Ukraine. This is exactly what's happening in Ukraine, where people are running from their homes, forced from their homes, not knowing where to go." And I'm thinking to myself, what did they think? Where am I going? Where will I sleep tonight? Will I see the sunrise tomorrow? Where's my next meal coming from? Where are you, God? And I think Ukrainians must have been asking themselves the same question. And I can't ignore residents of Gaza. So we have a chance to make those connections and think what was happening to them, how powerful those moments must have been. And if the Goldbergs were alive today and we could ask them what they remember about that moment, it would be extremely powerful. And I think today students do have a chance to connect with survivors, with rescuers, to ask those critically important questions.
Absolutely. You've alluded to this several times now, but just for a little clarity for us, what is it exactly that you hope that readers come away with after they finish reading Felix and Bluma's story?
Well, I hope they're enlightened. I hope they walk away saying, oh, I know more about the Holocaust through this couple's story than I ever thought I knew. I hope they get a sense of anti-Semitism and how it affected. I hope they understand how propaganda was used at the time to convince millions of people that the Jews were the problem. Um, and I hope they begin to appreciate the fact that Jews and others want to come to America for a better life, to have a new start. They see promise in America. And so I think there are lots of connections there between the past and the present. And I think even um, being Jewish, our Torah, our Jewish Bible says, let's welcome all. We don't turn people away. And today we're turning people away. And that's not It's not right. And I think we need to help those who cannot help themselves. And I know when the Goldbergs landed in Columbia, South Carolina, they had nothing. The city of Columbia created committees, a committee on housing, a committee on learning English, a committee on how to get new clothes, how to find a job, all the things these new residents would need. And a national magazine cited Columbia, South Carolina as a model city for how to help resettle displaced persons. And I guess give me chills to think about our community coming together to do that in, I think, 1949 or 1950.
Yeah, and what an interesting way to be remembered also as this community that has come together to support people from all over from a life that is admittedly very hard and very unfair and walking into a community that's welcoming them. That's just beautiful.
I agree.
So I know that writing for youth was not your first foray into writing, but now that you've done it, do you feel like you might write something else for this age group?
Well, thank you. I actually have. I had a librarian tell me recently, Frank, I'm trying to wean my sixth graders away from graphic novels. Have you thought about converting the Goldberg story into a narrative version? And she showed me two paperbacks that were short narrative Holocaust stories. And I thought, we can do this. And in fact, in October, we're publishing the narrative version. It's called Risk, Resilience, and Redemption. And its subtitled is a Miraculous Holocaust Survival Story. It's only about 60 pages long, but I'm proud of this one as well. And mostly because the recommendation came from a librarian. She saw that the graphic novel's popular. We understand that, and some students will gravitate to that. That's fine. But what about a narrative version? So now we're going to give schools another version. In addition, we have a Spanish language version of our graphic novel. So we actually have three versions of the story, and I'm just pleased as punch and proud of all of them. And Mary, but I'm also proud, if I may say, about a teacher guide we produced to go along with the graphic novel. A colleague of mine here in South Carolina, an excellent educator, wrote a fantastic teacher guide. And I'm as excited about the teacher guide as I am the graphic novel itself, because I know many educators don't always incorporate a graphic novel into the classroom. And so the teacher guide is going to give the teacher some really concrete ways to begin to introduce the vocabulary, some of the concepts, uh, history, geography, and more. And I think that for me, that was really important. I didn't want to publish the graphic novel without a teacher guide. And that really goes back to one of my first jobs working for the public school system in Orlando, Florida, where I was the buyer of films and videos. And so the study guide that accompanied those materials was really important for teachers to have in their hands as they incorporated those materials into the classroom.
Is that educator guide available on your website, or is that something that educators need to ask you for in particular?
It's available for purchase through all of your regular book resources.
Great. So, Frank, I've asked you several questions today, but what question is it that I didn't ask you that you wished I had?
Well, some people say, "What's next? What are you going to do next? Can you rest on your laurels?" And I, I, I've got something in mind that's not related to the graphic novel, if you don't mind. I've been a photographer for the last 25 years of nature, and I've been documenting the great blue heron all that time. And more than 20 years ago, I tried to get a book published for young people about this bird. And I'm happy to announce here and now that a children's publisher here in Columbia, South Carolina, has accepted my manuscript. And so a young adult photo book of the Great Blue Heron will be published in 2027. And I'm really excited about that. But going back to the graphic novel, I'm always looking for opportunities to speak to students via Zoom or face to face. So any educator that's listening to our conversation that would like to invite me into the classroom, I'd be more than happy to do that because I think not only is the message important, um, I'm the messenger. Uh, I'll tell you that Henry Goldberg, the oldest, said to me, Frank, how much money have you made from writing this book? And I went, you said, Frank, I don't understand that. I said, well, Henry, you run a tile business. You succeeded your late father in running the business. You go to work every day to sell tile to make money. My writing of this book was never intended as a profit-making venture. My motivation's always been education. How can we elevate the Holocaust in the minds of young people? That's been my motivation, and it's been extremely satisfying to have written it and more importantly, to have this conversation with you. So thank you.
I'm so happy that you joined me today and that you are having these conversations with students and with educators. And that leads me into my next question, which is where can people get a hold of you? Where can they find out more about your work and reach out if they'd like?
My main website is my name, frankwbaker.com. That's my media literacy website. Our book's website is wesurvivedtheholocaust.com. And you can find my contact information on both of those sites. And the website we created for teachers is storiesofsurvival.org.
Thank you for all of that. And listeners, I hope that you check out all of Frank's work and websites, and also if this book or the graphic novel or the a Spanish version sound like great fits for you or for someone you know. I hope you look for them wherever you get your books. And thank you so much, Frank. It was a pleasure having you.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you again.